All right. So first of all, thanks everybody to all who joined this room. I know you have a buffet of dishes to pick from. You have multiple tracks and multiple talks going in parallel, and so if you decide to come to this one, I truly appreciate that. So thanks for joining. Uh, I'll be talking about a topic that is very close to my heart. I mean, feature teams and component teams. And this is a topic that every organization has to deal with at some point in their agile adoption. Some think about it at the start of their Scrum adoption. Some think about it, sometime later when they run into issues with their Scrum adoption. But every now and then, organizations run into this debate whether they should go with a feature team model or a component team model, and what is it that suits them more in their organization. So let's look into this topic. What I'll try to do is I'll tell you a story of a let's say a fictional bank, and I will run through a sprint, a 10-day sprint, 2-week sprint, and then we will run the sprint in parallel for both a feature team and a component team, and then we will see what are the differences on a day-to-day basis if you are in a feature team or versus a component team, and how does it affect the team itself, the morale of the people, the happiness of the people, and how does it impact the end delivery at the end of a sprint. Okay, so let's go in. So like I said, let's look at a fictional story of a bank. Okay, so this bank is called the MacDroid Bank. Somewhere, the Mac people and the Android people became friends, and they formed this bank. Now, this bank is building a mobile application for its customers. A very typical scenario. Most banks offer mobile apps these days, and they've decided to use Scrum for product development. Now they have two choices. Either they can set up feature teams and build this application, or they can go into a component team kind of setup. So we will run this story in parallel on both the tracks. So we will see if they go with the feature team, what happens. If they go with the component team, then what happens, and then see how the story progresses. Okay. Uh, Now, very quickly, let me just in summary tell you what's the difference between a feature team and a component team. Although there are a lot more differences, but I'll keep to the bare minimum. So, feature team is a team that works across components. It takes a customer centric feature, an end to end customer centric feature, and then to build that feature, if it has to work across component. Now component could be, say, your UI layer, your backend layer, your database. These are the different types of components in your stack, let's say. So this team will go and work on all the components to deliver this end to end customer centric feature. Okay. Whereas a component team is a team that focuses purely on one component, right? So you could have a team which is dedicated to your front end layer, a team that is dedicated to database, a team that is dedicated to your back end layer, say Java or whatever other technologies or languages you're using. So that's primarily a component team structure, whereas a feature team structure is where a team can work across components to deliver an end-to-end functionality. Uh, so now the bank that is trying to build this application has two choices. Either they go with a feature team setup, or they go with a component team setup. So let's say in scenario one, the bank decides that we want to form feature teams. So what they do is they pull in people from different waterfall projects that they were running in the past. So they let's say pick one person from the database group, one person from the mobile specialization group, one person from the Java group, or one person from testing, and they form a cross-functional team, which they call as their feature team. Uh, uh, let's call this team as Team F, okay, for feature. So Team F is a mix of people coming from different backgrounds, different skill sets, back end, front end, database, everything, and they form one team. On the other hand, in the second scenario, you form component teams where you get all your Java developers in one team and form a team, or you form a team of all your front end developers, something like that. Or it could also even be, you have a team that specializes on the mobile development technology, one team that specializes on all the backend systems in the bank. Let's say the core banking system in the bank is one team. A CRM system in the bank is another team. Those are also in a way components within your overall architecture. Okay, so these are the two scenarios. So let's say there is a team F, which is a feature team. In the second scenario, there is a team C, which is a component team. Let's say it is dedicated to mobile development technology. So team C is the mobile technology team. Okay. Now let's see what happens. So they form their teams, and now they want to start building this product, which is their mobile app. So the product owner comes in. The product owner has a product backlog. Now the product owner is a business person. He has defined his product backlog with regards to end-to-end customer functionality that is needed, right? So the product backlog looks something like this. So first item on the backlog is the customer should be able to view their cash account balances. So when they log into the application, they should be able to see, what are the balances across different accounts. Second item is a customer should be able to see their term deposits, different kind of products that are offered by the bank. Customers should be able to see their balances. Third one is that they should be able to see what are the interest rates they are earning on their accounts. Fourth one is, they want to see detailed transactions. These are all things that most of us must be familiar with in our mobile banking or web banking. We come across these kind of features, right? We're able to see our balances, we're able to see our transactions, and so on. And then number 5 priorities, should be able to make fund transfers and so on. So this is the product backlog that the product owner has come up with. And if you notice, they are all end-to-end customer-centric features, right? They're not split, or they're not defined in terms of which systems in the banks are affected or what technologies are affected, right? Okay. So now what happens? So let's start our sprint. So okay, so the first sprint starts. Now on the first sprint, on day one, let's say we are in the feature team scenario. So team F looks at the product backlog. During the sprint planning, they pick up the first 3 items of the product backlog. Those first 3 items are, the customer should be able to see their balances in their cash account. Customer should be able to see the balance in the deposit account, and the customer should be able to see what are the interest rates they are earning on their accounts. Okay, so those were the first 3 top priority items in the backlog. So team F decides to pick these 3 items during their sprint planning. And how do they do that? They try to split the backlog items into detailed tasks within the team. They identify what are the technical tasks needed to implement this backlog item, and based on that, based on their capacity planning and all that, they at the end of the planning, they say we can likely forecast the first 3 items to be delivered in the sprint. Okay. Now, as part of their discussions, they also realize that they will have to build a couple of microservices. So there'll be one service that will fetch the account balance information from the, let's say the backend core banking system, and then display that balances on the mobile application UI. Okay. Similarly, there'll be one service that will be needed to fetch the interest rate information from the backend system and display it on the UI, right? So they identify to implement these 3 backlog items, they will need to build 2 new microservices. Okay. Anyhow, so they plan for it, and then they start working on the first item of the backlog on the second day of the sprint after their sprint planning. Now let's cut over to the second scenario. Okay, so in parallel now, let's say if there was team C, which is a component team, which is mostly focused on the mobile, the UI part, the front end technology, and they have very little understanding or very little knowledge of the backend systems in the bank. Okay, so what do? They also look at the first three backlog items, the item to display the account balances, the item to display interest rates, and they also identify that two microservices will need to be built to get this data from the backend system or the core banking system. Uh, but since they are not the core banking team, they are only the mobile team. They identify that there are two dependencies. They will need to go to the core banking team and tell them that, hey, we need you to build two microservices for us, which we will consume. And then we will, by consuming those services, we will be able to show this account information on the mobile banking UI, right? Uh, so they identify some dependency. Now, of course, this doesn't, this doesn't excite them because now they have a dependency on the other teams, so they cannot really finish the whole thing unless the other team also delivers their part of the work. But anyhow, they reach an agreement with the other team because the other team is also doing their sprint planning. So they reach an agreement, and the other team also says, the core banking team says, yeah, we will build this microservice for you. Somewhere in the middle of the sprint, we'll give it to you, and you can integrate and you can build your feature as well. So they both agree on when and how this dependency will be resolved and how this service will be built. Okay, so this is what happens on the first 2 days of the sprint. So during sprint planning, and then on the first day of the sprint, in both scenarios, the team start working on the first item of the backlog. Okay, now so through the sprint, let me also try to chart out what's the motivation levels of the team, okay, as the sprint goes by. So on day one, so the orange line on this graph shows you the feature team scenario. So feature team on day one, when they did their sprint planning, they understood the backlog item and they planned for the first three items. Their morale level was 100, let's say. Let's take that as the baseline. So they were all eager and excited. We are starting a new sprint, and we will implement these new features in the app. So they are at level 100. And then on second day, as they start work on the first item, they start writing the initial UI design and everything. They are still at level 100. They are still excited, eager to implement this feature. On the other hand, the yellow line shows you the component team. Okay, so on the first day when they did their sprint planning, they identified that they actually have dependency on the core banking team or the backend system team. So that kind of brought down their mood a little bit. They were a little demotivated because they knew that they will have to do a lot of coordination with the other team during the sprint, get the dependency sorted, and then only they will be able to deliver the feature, right? So their base motivation was a little lower on the sprint planning day because of their arguments or their sort of debate with the core banking team to agree on a dependency resolution. But then on the second day, they started work as well on the UI part while they were still waiting for the backend team to deliver. So they were back on the base level 100. Okay, so that's how the motivation chart looks like. Okay, so the first 2 days are gone, and both the teams are now working on the first item in the backlog, right? Now what happens on the next 4 days of the sprint? Now very soon the feature team realizes that nobody in the team has knowledge of the backend system. even though they've built the UI and everything, because it's a new UI, relatively they were able to build fast. There was only one person in the team uh, who had earlier worked on the backend core banking system, so he was able to give some inputs, but still as a team they were not able to build that microservice that was needed to get the data out of the core banking system. So over the next 2 to 3 days, they struggled. They did a lot of knowledge sharing sessions. So they tried to go through the code base of the backend system. They tried to study it together. They spent a lot of time understanding the code of the legacy system. They spent a lot of time experimenting, trying out the microservice, uh, and it took them about 4 days uh, to build that simple microservice just to get the data out of the account balance data out of the core banking system. But eventually, at the end of 4 days, they were able to build that service, because as a team for 4 days they were just trying to understand and trying to build that service. And then once they were able to build that microservice, they integrated it with the new UI, and the first item was done. The first item was to display all the cash account balances, right? And so they were able to finish this by the end of day 6. More than half the sprint is already gone. So and they were able to finish only the first item. So in the first 3 4 days there was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of they wanted to uh, understand the core banking system, trying to write code on top of that legacy system, but eventually at the end of day 6 they managed to finish the first item. Now let's cut over to the second parallel story. uh, Now the component team, so if you remember, on the first day they had agreed with the core banking team that the core banking team will build the microservice really fast. And uh, so this component team was only building the UI, and they were waiting for the other team to deliver the microservice so that they can integrate and then finish the backlog item. But what happened on day 3 4? The other team said, "Oh, our priorities have changed. Your service is not what we are going to build. We have to build something else first, because our product owner says we have to do something else first before we can start your work." So there was a lot of arguments uh, between the two teams. Team C kept chasing the backend team to build their service so that they can finish their part of the work, but it wasn't happening, and there were ugly arguments. And then also, even though on day 5 and 6, when the backend team started work on this microservice, uh, they faced a lot of complexities as well. Even though they understood the backend system well, but there were some complexities that they ran into. So that also delayed the work on the microservice. So now what did team C do in the meanwhile? So they first 2 days they were just waiting, and eventually they got so frustrated. What they did was they started working on the item 4 of the backlog. So they said, let's wait for the backend team to give us the microservices, deliver on the dependencies. Until while we are waiting, let's go and pick the number 4 item from the backlog. So they told the product owner, we will work on the next thing while we are waiting on the first 3 items. And number 4 was, I think, the ability to do fund transfers or something. So they picked up that feature. Uh, so this is what happened, in the first 6 days of the sprint. Now, quickly, if we again look at, what was the mood of the team or the motivation within the team. Now, if you see the feature team, the orange line, so initially they were all good. First day they were all excited. We are building this new feature and all, and but soon they realized they had very little knowledge about the core banking system, and they had to write this microservice on top of the core banking system to get the data. And they really struggled hard because they had no idea about it. They really tried to understand it first. They tried to get some knowledge sharing happening, and so on. So the motivation level went down. So it went down from 100 to 60 to 40 on day 4 of the sprint. But after day 4, they finally managed to actually build the microservice, because for 2-3 days they were collectively trying to understand that system and build that knowledge. And once they on day 5 they finally managed to build that service and integrate with the UI. On day 6 their motivation was back up on 100, because they were able to finish the first backlog item end to end, the item to display the account balances on the mobile app, right? So now they were again all very excited and very motivated, back at level 100. Now at the same time, if you look at the yellow line, the component team. So initially on day 2, they were also happy. They were starting their UI work while they were hoping that the backend team will deliver the the backend service. But then the other team did not deliver. They kept arguing, kept following up. There was a lot of coordination needed. The product owners of the two teams, because it was a component team setup, they had these component product owners. So they were also arguing for priorities, and so the motivation level just went down. So even on day 6, when finally they knew that they are not getting the backend service, or the backend team is still working on that, they decided to pick the next item from the backlog, and but the motivation within the team was really low. Okay, now let's look at the next 3 days of the sprint. So what happened during the next 3 days? uh, Now remember, in the feature team scenario, they had finished item 1 of the backlog until day 6. So on day 7, they started on the item 2. Uh, Now, but they also realized that they are not going to finish 1, 2, and 3, which they had forecasted at the start of the sprint. Uh, because they are only starting item 2 now on the 7th day, they are very likely not going to finish item 3 of the backlog. So they told the product owner that, sorry, we forecasted 3 items, but it doesn't look like we will finish all the 3. We will likely finish only 2. So they informed the product owner about dropping item number 3. And then uh, uh, they focused on item number 2. So the initial microservice that they had built, they just enhanced that one to get the additional balances for the deposit accounts. Remember, so the first item was cash balances. The second one was term deposit balances. So they just had to tweak the first microservice a little bit to get the term deposit balances as well. So they were able to get that data displayed on the UI. And so item 2 was also done at the end of day 9. Okay, which is the second last day of the sprint. So they were able to finish 2 items out of the 3 that they had forecasted at the start of the sprint. Now, on the team C side, now they were informed eventually from the core banking team that they would not be able to deliver the microservice in the current sprint. They have to wait until the next sprint, because it has been deprioritized, or there are some other issues with the service. And on the item 4 that the team C had started, even on that one, there were some issues that they were facing, and they were not able to make much progress. Even for that, they had dependency on the backend team, right? So there were some integration issues there. So that's how things looked at the end of day 9. So finally, on the last day of the sprint, there was sprint review. So during the sprint review, if we look at the team F scenario, the feature team scenario, so the team members, product owner, a couple of customers also came in from the bank. Some stakeholders were there, so they were all sitting in the sprint review, and the team mentioned that we forecasted 3 items, but we could only finish 2. So, and when the users or the customers and the stakeholder, they tried to log into the app, they saw their cash account balances, the deposit balances. And in fact, the customer was very happy. It looked very nice. The real time balances were there. So they were very happy. They said, oh yeah, this looks really nice. And this is what we thought we expected to see in the app. And then they said, uh, you know, the third item about the interest rates, uh, the team said we could not finish it. Uh, the customer said, you know what, I don't need to see the interest rates at this point. It's not very important. Uh, Instead of that, what you do next is you give me my fund transfer history, okay, which was earlier way lower down in the backlog. But now the customer, after seeing the current set of features, the customer said, it's okay, the interest rates can wait. But next, what you should work on is give me my fund transfer history. Okay, so, and the product owner also said, okay, so I will prioritize the backlog accordingly, where fund transfers is the next thing we should be doing instead of displaying interest rate information. So now the team felt a little bit of relief, because the team was thinking, oh, we were not able to finish this item 3 of displaying interest rates. Now that item is actually a lower priority item, and we don't even need to do that. The more higher priority item is to enable fund transfers. So it gave a little bit of relief to the team as well. Okay, so all in all, everybody is happy. The customer likes the feature, product owner is happy, and the team also shared their story of how they were able to learn the new core banking system or the backend system while working on this feature. So all around happy, cheerful, everybody was clapping and so on. So the sprint review was a celebration. Now, on the other hand, uh, if you take the component team scenario, so what happened there? So at the end of the sprint, on the first 3 items of the backlog that they had initially picked, they were only the mock UI screens that they could show, because the backend data services were not built. And they mentioned, that we were trying to get the services built, but they were not done, and so on. So there was a lot of finger pointing, blaming each other, they did not do, we did, and things like that. Uh, and then there was no potentially releasable increment at the end of the day, right? So of course the customer and the stakeholders were not happy. I mean, they said, what do we do with this mock screen? I mean, show me my balances. If you can't show me that, then what's the point, right? So in fact, they got so unhappy. The customer said, why should I be part of a sprint review? You are wasting my time. So a very contrasting scenario, sad scenario in the sprint review, where everybody is just frustrated, and there's blaming and so on, right? So that's how the 2 sprint reviews look like. So even though on the feature team side, they did not finish all their 3 items, there is still a celebration. In the component team side, also they did not do anything, and at the same time there's a lot of unhappiness around. Okay, so let's look at the motivation chart. So what happened on day 9 and 10? So the orange line of feature team. Uh, so it, even though they were a little unhappy because they did not finish all the 3 items that they forecasted, but uh, when the customer said, I'm so happy, and I actually want to change priorities, and we don't even need to do item 3 right now. So the motivation level, the happiness level went up, right, significantly. And on the yellow line for component team, nothing was delivered. There were dependencies, there were arguments, blame gaming, and so the motivation level went down to the negative territory by the end of the sprint. So uh, it's just an indication of what a feature team setup and component team setup does to the team themselves. I mean, there are lots of pros and cons of both approaches in terms of product delivery, how your sprints work, how the different roles work. But in terms of the team motivation itself, there is a significant impact on how feature teams and component teams work. So after the sprint review, both the teams did their retrospectives. So the feature team, they got together, they spoke about how the sprint went by, uh, and then they were actually happy that they have together learned the core banking system or the backend system. At least the some part of that system is now known to them. So in future, if there are more requests or more features where they have to integrate with backend or use that system, then they'll be able to do that. So they were very happy that together they learned, although there were some frustrating times in the first 3-4 days of the sprint where they were trying to learn the system, and they were trying to get a hang of things, but eventually they managed to do it. So they were very happy. They grew stronger as a team because they learned a new skill together, a new system they learned together. There was a lot of collaboration while doing that. So they grew stronger as a team. But they also decided on an improvement item for themselves, that during their sprint planning going forward, maybe they should get better at forecasting. So they uh, even in the previous sprint, I mean, they knew that they will have to work on the core banking system, which they were not very familiar with, and yet they forecasted three items. Somehow maybe there was an area of improvement, that going forward they should realize the complexity, or they should plan a little bit better. So that was a improvement that they decided for themselves going forward. Uh, Now, in the component team scenario, the sprint retrospective was a very different scene. They were all very frustrated with the customer feedback, the product owner feedback, and they were generally complaining that why are we always waiting for other teams to deliver before we can do our work, and why are we blamed if the feature is not delivered because the other team did not deliver their part of work, so we were stuck. And this team did not really learn anything new. I mean, they were only working on the UI layer or the technology that they knew already. They did not learn much. They were mostly waiting. So it was a very gloomy scenario on their side. And what was the improvement that they decided for themselves was, let's experiment to work as a feature team rather than a component team, right? So let's work across components. Even though we may struggle, we may slow down considerably, we may deliver only one out of five features or whatever we decide, uh, but we will not be frustrated while waiting on dependencies to be resolved, or while arguing with others on priority clashes, and those kind of things. So they decided to work as a feature team. That was the improvement item. So I just try to snapshot a sprint journey of typically how a feature team and a component team will work through a sprint, and how what impact it has on the motivation levels of the people in the teams during the sprint, and at the end, which one is better suited for product development. Now, let's go back to that component team. So they decided that they want to move towards or experiment with a feature team model. Uh, Now, if any organization, product group, or a team uh, wants to move towards a feature team setup, and it's always a journey. There is always a intermediate state, and then eventually you build the skills and the knowledge to get to a feature team stage. uh, the Scrum values, the 5 Scrum values of courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness, they offer a very good guideline in terms of giving you the viewpoint that you can follow to journey towards a feature team setup. Courage to take on the unknown. As a team member, if let's say I'm a Java developer for 10 years, 15 years, and now I have to work on JavaScript or a database or whatever else, I should have the courage to take on the unknown. I mean, I if I just stay in my comfort zone and I say I will only do Java development and I won't get into JavaScript, then it won't work, right? And we will always remain in that frustrating component team scenario. that I described. So you need courage to take on the unknown. Every team member needs to use courage. Focus is on the customer centricity. So people should understand that with a component team setup, in most cases, you're only building a part of the customer centric feature. You're not delivering an end-to-end customer value. So even if that component team had finished their part of work, it would only be a part of the whole feature. It wouldn't be the full feature itself. So therefore, if you want to be customer centric, if you want to deliver end-to-end customer value, then you need then that focus should help you or inspire you to move towards a feature team setup. You need commitment to minimize the complexity. You know, one of the dependency management or complexity management is a major drawback when you have multiple teams working on the same product. So you need commitment that, you know, we are going to minimize complexity as much as possible. We are going to reduce dependencies as much as possible. So as an organization or a product group, you should try to do that. That will help you to move towards a feature team setup. You need respect for people and their efforts, right? So you should many times it happens that you start working on a new component which was being worked upon by a different team or a different set of people earlier, and you start finding faults, or you say, they don't have the right kind of quality standards or code standards that we maintain in our code base and things like that. Those kind of discussions happen very frequently. You need to respect what others have done, try and understand why certain things were done. When you start working on different components beyond your only component, you need a lot of contextual knowledge. You need to be more understanding of things. So that will help you to become a better, stronger feature team. And lastly, the openness. So you should be open to feedback. So similar to when you work on different components that were initially, so-called owned by other teams, you also have to open up your components or your piece of work to others so that they can make changes to your components. And so you should be open to feedback. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I looked at the code base on which you were working earlier, and I thought this can be done better or that can be done better, you should be open to the feedback, right? So courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness, the 5 Scrum values are a key guideline that you can use to move from component team to feature team. Okay, so all in all, I mean, I am a big fan of feature team, but I also understand that it needs a lot of courage and investment, a lot of learning to move from component to feature team setup. But that's a journey that is worth taking, in my opinion. With that, thanks so much for listening in, and please reach out to me if you want to discuss on this topic. I'm very happy to talk more. I'm there on Twitter, LinkedIn, or on Medium. You can find me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.